lot of people ask the question, what is the difference between apartheid and racism, Jim Crowism? What people don't understand is that, ain't it amazing that in all of Africa, with all of the colonialism that went on, that South Africa is the only country that really suffered from apartheid? What people need to understand is that apartheid was just not a system that was in place because white folks in South Africa hated black folks. Let's go all the way back to 1866. Okay. In 1866, there was a young South African male fishing along the banks. While he was fishing along the banks in Cape Town, he found one of the biggest diamonds that was ever discovered in South Africa, or in Africa, period. Once he found that diamond, and that diamond got out, the people who were interested in it, they realized that there were a lot of minerals that were very valuable in South Africa. So from that period on, in Cape Town, they went over there, and initially they mined and they tried to pay the people, but there was so many minerals and there was so much money to be made that they began to discriminate against the people. They began to treat them inhumane. They began to use various tactics such as apartheid and what we would call American form of racism in order to justify taking these diamonds from these people. Now that was during that period. Then later on in the game, they found out that Johannesburg, South Africa, had one of the biggest gold mines in the whole entire world. They said that in Johannesburg alone, that half of the gold in the world was there. And that's when you began to see a lot of apartheid. You began to see a lot of discrimination against the South Africans. You began to see a lot of oppression. You began to see these people form police groups and so on and so forth to further oppress these people, because they didn't want these people to know how rich their minerals were in South Africa. South Africa, Johannesburg, at one time during the gold rush, it was so prosperous that they compared it to Manhattan in New York. Now, you know, people were coming from all over the world. People would house some of the biggest diamond mines and some of the largest gold supplies. That's the reason why they began to oppress the South Africans, because they never wanted the people to claim right. They began to claim right to the land, and they did basically what they did to the Indians. You know, basically, you know, one of the things that they did to the Indians were they were able to steal their land, and they were able to kill them and put them on reservations and oppress them in a whole nother perspective, because all of this land in America is Indian territory. Yeah. You know, well, if you think about the Indian situation here in America, and you think about all the gold, I'm talking about the half of the gold in the world was in Johannesburg. And you know, Johannesburg is not an African name. You know, I mean, Goldberg, Silverman, Steinberg, Johannesburg, you know the rest. You know what I mean? We don't even have to go there. So we know that, you know, these people began to, you know, hijack the government, because it was just as important for them to take the land from the South Africans as it was for them to take the land from the Indians. So apartheid, the reason why apartheid is different from racism in America is because what represents in America, we were brought to this country as free labor. We were brought up to this country as slaves. So therefore, we suffered in this country for 250 years. Before that, it wasn't no racism. You know, the word race, I spoke about that in my previous conversation. The word race came up around 1635 under the doctrines of exclusion, where they said that no black man, you know, will have the rights of a white man, and no black man could be compared to a white man. So around the 1600s, you begin to start to see racism in America. And then later on, that racism turned into Jim Crowism, where, you know, they started saying, you know, blacks are inferior, and that blacks should eat over here, and that blacks not allowed to go to this restaurant, and they began to segregate blacks from the whites. That was a different form of racism, but racism is not a group of people. It is a system. It is systemic, and it has a different tone than apartheid. Apartheid and racism could be connected the same, but the difference between apartheid and racism, and the difference between the situation with the blacks in America and the blacks in South Africa, was that the blacks in South Africa owned the land. It was already their land. They weren't enslaved. They wasn't subjects. These people went over there and literally took their land, took their minerals, and then subjugated them. Well, we were brought over to this country, and we built this country. You know, this country was taken from the Indians, of course, but we built this country. And then after, you know, Lincoln so-called emancipated the slaves, and then they began to impose, you know, racism over on us and Jim Crowism over on us. So it's a difference between racism and apartheid. You know, so when you think about that, you got to think about, at one time, South Africa had all of the gold. You know, it had all of the gold, half of the world gold. It had great diamond mines. It had a lot of minerals, and the Dutch or the Portuguese, whoever the hell they were, they went over there and they hijacked their government. You know, they said minority rule because it's less white people over there than it was South Africans. So they began to say, well, because you know we're white, we're the minority, we rule. And they hijacked their government. They formed a parliamentary government. They did other things, and basically, you know, they had to keep these people subjugated. They had to keep these people oppressed because they knew that they had took this land and they took these minerals from these people. So that's the reason why apartheid was imposed in Africa versus racism was imposed in America. You know, racism basically means one group control another group and control the money. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So when you think about racism, like I said, don't think about poor white people or poor black people calling each other niggas and hunkies. That's not racism. That's name calling. Racism is where, you know, another group controls all the minerals and they control all the wealth, and they keep another person through systemic and systematically keep other people, you know, from rising. So basically, if you're a black person, you go to a bank and you try to apply for a loan and they don't give you that loan, that's racism. If you're a black person and you go into the courtroom and the judge give you more time than he give a white person, that's racism. That's systemic racism, and it's imposed for various reasons. Yeah. Because they don't ever want their former slaves to ever get in a position where they in power, where they might do unto them what was done to them. You know, they might, you know, say for example, if all the black folk was to come into power and get all the wealth, the biggest fear of the racist mentality person, you know, white supremacy, is that if these people ever come into power, that they're going to do to us as we've done to them. And I don't think that they would never have to worry about that, because they did a great job in breaking the so-called Negro, the black, the colored, and the Ethiopian here in America. You know, I think, you know, we have been so systematically broken, and we have been, there's so many psychological images and chains of slavery on our brain that, you know, it would take many years for us to overcome. And that's why the South Africans fought all the way to the end until they got their government back, because they knew that they were already in power, that they was fighting for something that was already theirs. Yeah. You know, we don't have no right in America. We don't own none of this. You know what I'm saying? We were brought here against our will. So we're not going to fight as South Africans did. We might fight for civil rights, but that's the wrong thing to be fighting for. We need to be fighting for human rights. So that's the difference between racism and apartheid. You know what I'm saying? You know, apartheid was a system that was put in place because another group of people came in and took all the gold and all the diamonds, and they had to justify it. And the only way they could justify it is by employing guns and armies and so on and so forth, you know, to kill these people when they got out of order, to keep them in check. Whereas in America, you know, we were brought over here against our will, and once we were brought over here against our will, racism was imposed to keep us in check, forever doing to them what they done to us. And to keep us continuously, you know, a permanent underclass, and never put us, we never are to gain any political power or any economical power where we can actually wake up and see what's really going on. And, you know, it's crazy because in this country, one group of people, dominate 80% of all the wealth in this country, and we're talking about, the rich white people, not the regular white people. That's the difference, so I want white people to hear this and think I'm racist. I'm talking about the rich people,
Too cool to come 24/7.